So, bread. We all eat it. We know there's carbs, but what else? I give you sourdough. One of the easiest breads to make, all you have to do is make a sourdough starter, which really quickly is just the secret ingredient that you put into your dough to make your bread all sourdoughy. All you have to do is pour in some flour, some water, wait 24 hours, then repeat that for a week, and boom, you got yourself a sourdough starter. You see, starters are so essential because they're full of microbes, namely bacterial yeast and lactic acid producing bacteria. You see, yeast are the microbes that make your bread rise and make it nice and airy. And as well, it'll give you some of that like sourdoughy bread flavor and aroma when you eat it, which, we all love. And see, these guys reproduce by breaking down simple carbohydrates, usually like sugars, things of that nature, and make CO2 and ethanol, and when they get warm, they speed this process up a lot. And so when you're cooking the bread rises and gets fluffy before all the yeast die. Fun tidbit for you. And so now microbe numero dos, lactic acid producing bacteria. This is the stuff that also feeds on sugars, but it mainly outputs you lactic acid and sometimes CO2 and acetic acid. This is the stuff that gives your sourdough that good, essential, sour, yummy flavor. It also, it's the reason why your bread lasts long on the shelf, and it makes it slightly acidic, so it also reduced other foreign, like, bad bacteria that could get in and harm you, because it can't survive the acidity. Anyways, so you say, Henry, yes, I get that these bacteria work together, and they make this starter, and it goes in the bread. But how do I make the starter? What does it do? How do I do this? Well, I'm going to show you. On the screen are pictures of me going through the steps to create a starter. So the initial recipe is 50 milliliters of starter, 50 milliliters of water, and 100 milliliters of flour. Usually, you will use a small bit of another starter to kickstart your own starter, as we're doing here. However, you could make your own starter without it, and only use flour water. Anyways, get yourself a large waterproof container, and dump in the ingredients above. Tap water works, and for need, so does any old bag of flour you've got laying around. You can pour the ingredients in any order, it doesn't matter. After that, you just put your jar somewhere warm for 24 hours. After the first day, you will switch your recipe to the second one shown. The only important difference is replacing the 50 milliliters of starter with the existing starter. Basically, after the first day, just pour in 50 milliliters of water and 100 milliliters of flour into your already existing starter bottle. Everything else is the same. You will keep following the second recipe of pouring in those 50 milliliters of water and 100 milliliters of flour into your existing bottle, and then waiting 24 hours to do it again until you are ready to bake some bread. While watching that, did you wonder why this recipe? Could you change anything in it? If not, no worries, but that's what I was wondering, so I had to do some experiments around that process. I was mainly wondering what happens if you mess with the ingredients you put into the starter. So, I performed 2 experiments around the idea. My first experiment, I took a bunch of starters and set out to find what happens if you replaced water in the recipe with milk or some other liquid. Or my second experiment, I know that the yeast and lactic acid microbes feed off sugar. So what if I add some sugar into the recipe? How will it grow? I'm excited to see what happens as a result of experimenting with a recipe like this. How will the bread and starter end up looking like? As I said, I ran an experiment to answer some of my questions. First up was to prove my hypothesis that if you changed the liquid you put into your starter and baked it into a loaf of sourdough bread, the characteristics of the bread would greatly vary. Every week, I would take the original recipe we used and just change the liquid used instead of water. I figured to get a wide range of possible liquids, I would bake a loaf each from milk, orange juice, and Gatorade. Of course, to make sure we know about possible variations that happened, I also baked a control loaf with water. I attached the recipe I used for bread to the video if you want to bake your own bread. Here's the data I got from this experiment. Pause if you need to. As you can see, there's a lot going on. The main things are, though, is that there was a decent variation in the end results. But there are a couple important things to keep in mind. 1. Despite me being knowledgeable about the topic, I do have limited experience in baking bread, so personal skill could cause variation in bread results. 2. The original starter used in the first day of the recipe of all these other recipes was from a water-based starter, but after a week of dilution, its effects are likely minimal. Despite the starter playing such an essential role in the bread by nature, the nature of recipe to bake into bread will be mixed with a large amount of water and flour for the dough. This could have caused an unknown effect of how much the physical characteristics of the starter carried into the bread. So keeping these two things in mind, I would say yes, overall changing the liquid I put into the starter did cause large variation in the resulting bread. Many of the core characteristics varied from bread to bread, and there was no constant between all of the baked breads. This experiment has proven that varying the liquid you put into your starter can have an effect on the end bread's results. This can lead to many diverse, interesting bread flavors and characteristics that some of your own personal exploration could liven up in your own bread as well. Now, on to the second experiment. For this one, I was wondering if both yeast and lactic acid bacteria feed on sugar. What happens if you put even more sugar into a sourdough starter? What will happen? Going into this, my hypothesis was that changing the amount of sugar put into a sourdough starter would affect the rate and volume filled by its growth. To prove or disprove this, I first decided to have a control test, where I would create/feed a starter at the beginning of the week and record its volume at the same time every night for 7 days. Now for treatments, I had increasing sugar doses of 15, 30, and 60 grams of sugar added to a new starter created at the start of the week. I also measured the volume of the starters at the same time each day as well. The important thing is that I did only feed them once at the beginning of the week to best get a nice sense/idea of the sugar's effect over a longer period of time. So here's the data. As you can see, the sugar in the starter caused a clear increase in the volume of the starter up till the 60 grams, at which it dropped down between the 0 and 15 grams of sugar mark. Another important thing to look at is how compared to the control of 0 grams of sugar, all starters with sugar in them had a delayed fall off by at least 1 day. For the treatment with sugar at the end of the week, while they were decreasing, they did not fall or flatline as much as the 0 sugar did. Summing it up, in all scenarios tested, adding sugar did clearly affect the rate and volume reached by the starter compared to the control, both increasing it in the initial period and decreasing and a slower decrease in the end half. Based on this data, a rough outline for sugar input has been created. Adding sugar up to around 30 grams to your starter will increase the volume of the starter by a hefty amount. However, it is important to not put too much in or you will hinder growth and get diminished returns. Finding out and proving this relation is what I set out to do, so it is nice to see a clear relation between the two. So you've made it to the end of the video, hopefully with a bit more knowledge about sourdough, starters, and bread, about how the potential ingredients you put into it can change and affect the processes the starters go through, how important the liquid you put into your starter can affect the end results, how you can control how your starter grows by offering more sugars for the microbes in it to eat. Mainly, overall, how as a baker, you can improve and develop your bread making skills as well as foster an interest in exploring the worlds of sourdough and starters through conducting experiments. Some ideas if you feel curious and want to try some of your own experiments would be more liquids. Try more diverse things than I did. What if you use a combination of liquids? Let's go beyond the starter. What happens if you experiment with the actual bread recipe? Try changing when you feed it. Does it grow by certain rates? Are we sure the recipe of starter I provided is best? Try messing with that. How can we get the bread to have crunchier crust? How do you consistently get super nice and yummy airy bread? How do I always get the perfect level of sour flavor in my sourdough? These are the questions I, for one, am curious about. There are nearly infinite ways that you can explore starters if you're curious enough. I know I, for one, am, and will keep growing these starters to try and answer some of the questions I have. Thanks for watching.